It was we, the people.
Not we, the white male citizens.
Nor yet we, the male citizens, but we, the whole people.
We, the whole people.
But we, the whole people who formed this union.
And we formed it.
Not to give the blessings or liberty, but to secure them.
Not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity,
but to the whole people.
Women as well as men.
The principle of self-government cannot be violated with impunity.
the individual's right to it is sacred,
regardless of class,
caste,
race,
color,
sex,
or any other accident
or incident of birth.
What we ask is that you shall cease to imagine that women are outside this law.
and that you shall come into the knowledge
That disenfranchisement means the same degradation to your daughters as to your sons.
and it is on this line that we propose to fight our battle.
fight our battle.
Our battle.
The battle for the ballot.
all peaceably, but nevertheless persistently,
Through to complete triumph.
For all United States citizens to be
recognized as equals before the law.
In the late 1800s, this was Susan B. Anthony's message to America. What's yours? Write a letter to the New York Times sharing your vision of a more equal America, and we'll select one to publish in the Sunday paper.
Hi, I'm Veronica Chambers, editor of narrative projects at the New York Times. Today, August 18th, 2020, marks 100 years since the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which established American women's right to vote. We've spent a lot of time over the last year thinking about this momentous occasion. We interviewed historians, other journalists, politicians, activists, artists, and the descendants of suffragists. And what we learned was that suffrage history is really shorthand for women's history. So much that happened in the lives of American women in the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries dovetailed with suffrage and its legacy in some way. And the battles they fought to make sure all Americans had a voice in our democracy and were equal in the eyes of the law are still being waged today. All of this thinking about how no movement happens in isolation and how we often only know the names of a handful of leaders when it took 3 generations of women to get the vote inspired us to write a new book called Finish the Fight, about the diverse women who fought for voting rights but have been less recognized for their work. We had been fans of the playwright Ming Peiffer and Whitney White for some time. So we asked them if they would be interested in adapting some of the biographies in the book into a new form of theatrical storytelling. We were so thrilled when they said yes. This retelling of Finish the Fight, which we are delighted to share with you today, contains invented scenes and imagined conversations among 5 extraordinary women. The events of their lives and their accomplishments are real. This project was conceived to expand our lens on history and to include more of the participants in the story of suffrage. So we would be remiss if we did not include the people who have stewarded this land we call home. The New York Times is a global organization, and in 2019, we reported on the ground from 159 countries. Our headquarters is in New York City's Times Square, and we acknowledge that the land on which we work is the ancestral and unceded land of the Lenape. In the United States today, there are currently 574 federally recognized tribes of Native people, and there are an additional 63 state-recognized tribes. We pay our respects to these people, the traditional owners and caretakers of this land, past and present. Finally, please stick around after the show for a live discussion with Ming Peiffer and Whitney White about creating this project. And now, welcome to Finish the Fight.
Seneca Falls, 1848. The single most important.
The single most important.
The single most important. The single most important factor in spreading news of the women's rights movement around the country
was when we
gathered here on this hot, sun-drenched day at the boiling point of July to understand the height,
depth,
length, and breadth of our own degradation.
It was due to our sufferings,
trials, tribulations,
and dogged efforts that we created the Declaration of Sentiments,
outlining the rights of all women,
describing obscene injustices.
And because of us, our work, our contributions,
this would become the single most important factor in spreading news of the women's rights movement around the country in 1848 and into the future.
Beginning the fight for all women's suffrage.
Hold up. Can we pause a second?
All women?
You mean to tell me? Does homegirl even know where that word comes from?
See how they just...
It's from the French. Suffrage in Latin, then en français.
It means prayer, right?
Dare to take?
Intercessory prayers, but yes, correct.
I don't like how we're being...
Dare to erase.
Pushed to the side.
When I hear that word...
I want to challenge the term. Trouble the...
You know what I think of?
Meaning.
What? What do you see?
The image that's being presented.
A dusty, hot room, acrid, sour body odor, dirty, heavy petticoats, and the click, click, clack of black leather boot heels.
Being sold to us.
Is she scowling or smiling? I can't tell.
All I know is, given the chance to progress beyond me, she'd press that cow-skin soul into my cheek.
What about you?
Me?
When you hear suffragette, what do you see?
Bonnets, I suppose. Lots of bonnets.
Wrinkled stairs.
Women who don't have sex. What? It's true.
I mean, I think of a bunch of rich...
Privileged.
Nose in the sky.
Women with access.
Yes, access.
I dreamt they cut off my braids, only to realize my nightmare had happened.
To education, to opportunity.
I see whiteness.
Purposefully, systematically.
Lifetimes of theft.
Kept from us.
Bleaching of culture.
Erasure. Erasure. Erasure.
A leeching.
Images they project onto us. Fictions they trick us into believing are real.
Makes me so angry.
Sometimes I look at my own hands and I cry.
Make no mistake, it is purposeful. It is how this country was built.
Remembering the elk hides we stretched to make drums.
What do we do? What can we do?
I have cuts in the palms from my fingernails holding these fists so hard.
We tell them what we did. What we started.
My elders with the tattooed faces, chanting into the fire.
We pull back the curtain of this theater.
I can't be silent any longer.
My stolen ancestors.
You're right. We tell them what we fought for.
And what we accomplished.
Histories sing within me.
What we do is...
We stand together, strong. Stare into the face of those who seek our destruction. Announce ourselves to the universe. Tell our stories to a world that works to see us forgotten. We speak our names, stake out our territory, because this time, now, listen to my words carefully. This time,
this time, this time,
this time,
this time, you will remember us.
Let us tell you a little story about Frances.
Late 1850s. Imagine Pennsylvania.
Hear the sounds of a streetcar, wheels screeching on metal track.
There she is, sitting in her car.
Looking like the queen she is.
Minding her own damn business.
Nose buried in a book, a voracious reader.
Ever since she was a little girl, constantly inhaling words.
Suddenly, the train conductor...
Do we even have to mention what color?
Tells Frances she's...
not welcome to a seat.
Sound familiar?
Seats are for white passengers. You want a ride? Gotta ride up front with the driver.
Frances is furious.
Well, yeah, who wouldn't be?
Later, she writes to a friend about the incident.
In a letter, she says...
I did not move, but kept the same seat. When I was about to leave, he refused my money and I threw it down on the car floor and got out what I had ridden as far as I wished. Such impudence.
This is just one instance of many.
Macro, micro, let's just call it what it is. Racial aggression.
But that didn't stop her.
Gracias a Dios, no. If anything, it pushed her forward.
More she learned, more she read.
The more instances of injustice she heard about, she herself witnessed and experienced.
These stark moments of racism and violence radicalized her, made her realize that just writing about these ideas wasn't enough.
1850, Frances moves to Ohio. She's teaching sewing at the Union Seminary, a school run by the African Methodist Episcopal Church, when something shocking happens.
I heard the story of a free man who entered the state of Maryland around 1851, unaware of a new law that had passed some years earlier saying that any free blacks who entered the state could be arrested and sold into slavery. He was detained and later sold to a white man in Georgia. He died enslaved. Let me repeat that for y'all. He died enslaved. A man who had tasted the sweet sunlight of freedom wore shackles to his grave. To say it was unfair, unjust, horrific, heinous, disgusting, egregious, wrong. There are no words in any human language that could describe the white-hot pain, the knife-sharp fear, the rabid anger I felt knowing a free human soul could walk unknowingly into the violent open arms of a slaver. Picturing my brother, my sister roaming the streets, head held high, crowned in the golden belief of freedom, only to be captured and sold and owned in the sickest iteration of history repeating itself. I was happy for a time, living out my days, just me and my books, spending my time thinking, dreaming, writing. But those were luxuries I could no longer enjoy, knowing slavery still threatened the future of my people. The world called to me. I could hear this chorus of my ancestors singing in the most delicate part of my soul. I knew I had to do something, anything, to defend my own life and that of my people.
Fast forward.
1866, Frances gives one of her most famous speeches.
At the National Women's Rights Convention, she stands before the crowd, takes a deep breath and says,
"We are all bound up in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on its weakest and feeblest of members without receiving the curse in its own soul."
Oh, shit.
Yes.
Hey, mama.
Yes.
Go off, sis.
Speaking forcefully, she interrogated the idea that women's suffrage, at least in the way that it was being discussed and propped up, would solve all problems.
I do not believe giving women the ballot will immediately cure the ills of life. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs.
And then she began to tell them the story of the streetcar.
For the rest of my life, I fought. I fought for women's rights. I fought for the equal treatment of African Americans. In the 1890s, I led the American Association of Educators of Colored Youth and was a founding member of the National Association of Colored Women, alongside Mary Church Terrell and Ida B. Wells Barnett. I died in 1911, less than a decade before the 19th Amendment became law. My writing, which is still read today, resonates intensely with someone who was born in a time of supreme inequality. But still, I, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, believed deeply that my country could and would change. I wrote in one of my poems, "The shadows bear a promise of a brighter coming day."
We didn't cross the border. The border crossed us.
Picture it. High noon in the lawless desert.
Heat waves quiver up the vastness of sand.
A woman's dark hair whipped by hot mesquite wind.
She shields her face with her hand.
1885, Laredo.
Say it. Laredo.
It is here, on the lip of South Texas, kissing the northern banks of the Rio Grande, across from Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, Mexico,
that Hovita Idar enters the wild world.
One of 8 children destined for greatness.
Who would have known?
We meet her years later, staring down the barrel of a gun, defending her family's newspaper.
La Policía and Laredo were not happy.
It is 1914.
Just across the border from Texas, the Mexican Revolution was raging.
Our newspaper, El Progreso, had just run an editorial that pissed off a lot of people. It criticized President Woodrow Wilson on his decision to send U.S. troops to occupy Veracruz. At the same time, people in Mexico hated the dictator, President Porfirio Diaz, because this bastard made sure that wealth and power belonged only to a select few. As you can imagine, people were tired of not having any money, not being allowed to express their opinions. Injustice was everywhere. In the water, you could taste it.
Texas had been part of Mexico until 1836 when it declared independence.
Even after the annexation by the U.S. 9 years later, people still traveled back and forth with ease across the border.
But after the revolution broke out in 1910, Mexican people began fleeing to Texas to escape the rampant violence.
The second we arrived, we were met with the hate-bleached faces of white Texans. Racism vibrated electric in the air. Needless to say, tensions were high when El Progreso's editorial came out. Suddenly, I found myself surrounded by officers. These pendejos.
They told her to move out of the way.
They were shutting the paper down.
Threatened her employees.
But she just stood there.
I just stood there. I was a strong, educated woman, and I always took care to dress well. So let me just say that today, I was feeling myself. I was not somebody you could screw with. I would not, under any circumstances, simply be pushed aside.
The Rangers retreated, but returned the next day.
When I wasn't there, they sacked the building, beat the shit out of one of my employees, destroyed the printing press. They wanted to scare me, but I wasn't scared.
This event would not stop Jovita.
Hell no. Me and mi hermanos just started another newspaper called Evolucion.
In a letter, she proudly told a friend that
I even bought the new printing press myself.
Jovita wrote many of Evolucion's articles, just as she had at El Progreso.
I argued for better schools, more economic opportunities, and fairer treatment for Mexican Americans, and for women's rights, including the right to vote.
She wrote in one article,
"Working women, proudly raise your chins and face the fight. The time of your degradation has passed."
Can I ask you, what made you strong, facing off an armed band of police officers?
I was no stranger to hatred. Growing up, you could smell it. Noxious stain on the clear Gulf wind. When I was a teenager, my father, Nicasio, became the publisher of a newspaper called La Crónica. Now, even though we were firmly middle class, Texas was not an easy place for people like me, coming from Mexican origin. Shop windows had signs telling us to keep out. Mexican children were taught in segregated schools, fewer supplies, less qualified teachers. Sometimes, we would come across bodies. Mexican men found lynched. The strong, brown hands that helped work the land, lay bricks for houses, now cold and stiff on the hot mesquite sand. I started off working as a teacher, but with the unequal conditions, I got so frustrated. Every day I would get so upset. They gave me nothing. And I would stand there, empty-handed, staring into the eyes of these brilliant Mexican children, empty-handed. It was then, looking into the eyes of the future, that I knew I needed to do something.
1910, Jovita joined the staff of her father's newspaper where she could fight for change. The Idars weren't just journalists, they were activists.
In 1911, they helped organize
El primer Congreso Mexicanista,
the first Mexican Congress, a meeting of activists concerned with issues facing the community. As part of the Congress, Jovita helped found the League of Mexican Women, which may have been the first Mexican-American feminist organization.
That same year, I wrote under the pen name Estrella for the Greek goddess of justice. I published an article in favor of women's suffrage, but it wasn't just me. I wasn't the only Latina in the United States fighting for the right to vote. The rights for Latinas, like the rights of all women, depended on the state in which we lived and the customs and laws in those states. In Texas, voting rights were much more difficult for Latinas and other women of color than for our white sisters. So the 19th Amendment didn't necessarily mean that women like me could vote.
There were some white suffragists who worked to make sure that their Latina and African American sisters would also get the vote. But
for many, the important thing was that they,
the white women,
got the equal rights that were long denied them. And they saw immigrants, including Mexicans, as standing in their way.
Texas began allowing women to vote in primary elections in 1918, 2 years before the 19th Amendment was ratified. But that still didn't mean that all citizens could always vote.
In 1923, the state passed a law creating what is called a white primary, meaning that only white voters could choose a party's candidate.
Under this system, Black women and men were legally barred from voting in the primary.
For us Mexican Americans, it was more complicated. Under the law, technically we were considered white, but we were kept away from the polls by literacy tests, poll taxes, other exclusionary practices. My family and I challenged this system. Mi hermano Eduardo helped start a group called the League of United Latin American Citizens, which fought for voting rights and better schools and broader civil rights for Latinos. But in the early days, LULAC was only for men. They started allowing women to join in 1932, but only in separate all-female chapters. But even before that, I was in the fight. After the 19th Amendment was ratified, I was active in the Democratic Party. I even worked as a precinct judge, one of the people running the elections. I died in 1946, but the women that followed in my footsteps continued to push against barriers to fight for equal rights. In 1965, almost 20 years after my death, the landmark Voting Rights Act ended legal discrimination against African Americans at the polls. In 1975, Congress passed a law extending its protection to Mexican Americans and other minority groups. The most important aspect of this new law was a rule allowing many citizens whose first language wasn't English access to voting material in their language. After all, how can you vote if you cannot read the ballot?
No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
In China, the female species could never be deadlier than the male, because at all times she was under control. I refused to be controlled.
Okay.
Now who is this?
Got a little spunk in her.
She looks young.
Hey, should we?
Yeah, let's go over.
Excuse me, miss?
Huh?
Hi.
Hello. Hi. Can I help you?
We were just admiring your energy. And we were wondering, who are you?
Me?
Yes, you.
Tell us your name, mamacita.
My name is Mabel Ping-Hua Lee. I'm 16 years old, and I have had enough. I moved to New York City as a child in 1905. There were barely any Chinese immigrants on the East Coast at the time. Many of them lived in Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, and it was a brand spanking new community. The streets were alive with delicious smells, bamboo steamers selling tsai ru bao, men calling out in Cantonese selling hand-rolled cigars. Shop windows blazed with the bright colors of embroidered silk kipaos. The crowded city streets flooded with tonal music of voices from halfway around the world. Me and my parents lived on Bayard Street. In 1912, they had made a name for themselves. My father was a minister, fluent in English. He led the first Chinese Baptist church and was so active in the community that some referred to him as the neighborhood's unofficial mayor. Everyone knew me as the daughter of the mayor, and they knew how smart I was because, well, it was obvious. At the time, not everyone believed that girls needed to go to college. But my community, and more importantly, I knew that none of that ancient thinking applied to me.
Mabel attended Erasmus Hall High School in Brooklyn, and even then she had big plans to attend the all-women's Barnard College, the sister school of the all-male Columbia College.
I wanted to return to China one day and open a school for girls. I felt lucky to have had the opportunity to study in the United States, but I wanted young Chinese girls to have the same opportunities back at home.
Despite her clear intelligence and strong convictions, there was a limit to how much the community would stand behind her. And Mabel crossed the line when...
Basically, everyone got pissed when I joined the suffrage movement.
Mabel, darling, speaking as your mother, I don't know that you should be getting so mixed up with these radical...
Stop.
Mabel, you're already on the path to learning and higher education and expanding your influence that way. There is no need to stick your neck out there associating with these...
Care to finish that sentence, Dad? No, didn't think so.
But Mabel...
Mabel.
Okay, seriously? You two need to relax. I don't think you understand. Sure, these women are considered radical. I mean, wow, really out there, totally bonkers that anyone would demand equal rights or whatever.
Okay, you don't need to have an attitude.
No, but actually, I do. Mom, when was the last time you heard of freedom being won, of real change being enacted, of the oppressed being liberated without some deep emotion and sense of purpose behind it? Mom, I refuse to be a doormat.
Why the suffragettes? It's just a bunch of white women.
First of all, that's not true. And second of all, if it were, I see that as a pretty big glaring problem. If we don't work to include ourselves and demand equality in this society, well, I mean, why would we ever think that it would just be granted to us? I mean, it hasn't yet. And how long have women been contributing to the growth of this nation? Besides, I believe that voting will open a very important door for women. The laws that govern our society, the people who create and enact them, if we women don't have a say in what those things are and who those people are, how will we ever see what I believe are our God-given rights in action?
But you won't even be allowed to vote. The Chinese Exclusion Act has made it so that we cannot even become citizens.
And that is exactly the problem. And if we don't make ourselves visible and support these women, who the hell is gonna see the injustice of our own subjugation if we don't make this shit obvious ourselves?
Even though she wouldn't be able to vote, Mabel joined the cause.
And convinced her mother to join too.
Yo, my mom being a part of the suffrage movement was so controversial that newspapers, even the New York Tribune, covered it.
Tongues are still wagging in Chinatown after Mrs. Lee Tao went to a suffrage meeting. Mabel Lee, her daughter, is of course a helpless little suffragette who was already promised to march in the parade.
Hopeless little suffragette? Yeah, okay, we'll see about that.
In 1912, Mabel, who was just 16, led a contingent of Chinese and Chinese American women in one of the biggest suffrage parades in U.S. history. The New York Times reported
10,000 strong. The army of those who believe in the cause of women's suffrage marched up Fifth Avenue at sundown yesterday in a parade the like of which New York never knew before.
I didn't just march. I rode my little ass onto the streets on a white horse, galloping in at the start of the parade, rocking this dope three-cornered hat, the colors of the British suffrage movement.
Purple.
For loyalty, and to symbolize that the cause of suffrage was noble.
White.
For purity.
Green. the color of spring.
As a symbol of hope. The hope I had that all women would have the opportunity to see their voices heard. That all women would have access to education. That all women would one day enjoy the accesses and freedoms and privileges of being an equal American citizen under the eyes of God and the law. For no nation can ever make real and lasting progress in civilization unless its women are following close to its men, if not actually abreast with them. I rode atop that horse, head held high as the sturdy gallop of hooves kept the march of time beneath me. It was like a drum beating the militant sound of a clock ticking towards change. I rode on, and I kept that sound forever with me.
Something a lot of people in the U.S. don't know is that Mabel's activism grew out of China's New Culture movement, which included the idea that the suppression of women and the poor treatment of women were both holding China back and represented a kind of backwardness.
Yeah, dude, China's treatment of women was barbaric to say the least. I mean, foot binding was still happening in many villages across the country. Breaking women's feet at the ankles, holding them in on themselves, binding them so that they were literally physically immobile. Not to mention how that immobility spanned every aspect of society, of Chinese culture. Look, I'll tell you a story. One day, an American missionary in China was taking tea with a mandarin's 8 wives. The Chinese ladies examined her clothing, her hair, her teeth, and so on. But her feet especially amazed them.
Why?
Cried one.
You can walk and run as well as a man.
Yes, to be sure,
said the missionary.
Can you ride a horse and swim too?
Yes.
Well, then you must be as strong as a man.
I am.
And you wouldn't let a man beat you, not even if he was your husband, would you?
Indeed, I wouldn't.
The mandarin's wives looked at one another, nodding their heads. And then the oldest one said, softly,
now I understand why an American never has more than one wife. He is afraid.
But in all seriousness, men are afraid of us, of our power, intellect, intuition. Why else try to keep us down like this?
Mabel went on to get a PhD in economics from Columbia University, becoming the first Chinese woman to earn a doctorate degree there. In 1921, she published The Economic History of China with special reference to agriculture.
Although women's suffrage became law in 1920, it wasn't until 1943, when the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed, that Mabel and other Chinese American suffragists finally were granted the rights they fought so hard to achieve.
I eventually took over as a director of my father's church and founded the Chinese Christian Center, a community center on Pell Street that offered English classes, health services, a kindergarten, and job training to people in New York's Chinese community. I became an example of what a woman can do when given the chance to learn and lead.
Mabel, can I ask you something?
Of course.
As a young person, do you think that...
That what?
That something bigger than us is happening?
What do you mean?
Do you think that a change is coming?
Do you think this generation...
These younger people, these young women...
Will they hold hands and lead?
Do you think a change is coming? A new frontier waiting on the horizon?
I can't see the future, but I believe that change is possible, that real equality is within reach for all of us. I have to believe. I have to.
Well, a wolf, I considered myself. And yet I have eaten nothing. And I can scarcely stand. My parents could not speak. I mean to say, my parents could not speak in a language that would allow them to survive. My mother fetching water by the river, singing songs, Oheya, gathering firewood to heat our wigwam, could not shout in the streets. Only in her severed native tongue could she sing to me, warn me of the violence the pale faces brought upon our ancestors. I am from the earth.
I am from the earth.
My limbs, the boughs of towering trees, birdsong and the crash of ocean waves erupt from the muscles that is my mouth. My voice rings out.
My voice rings out.
Louder than any gunshot, bringing you to your knees. You opened your mouth, unveiling shark rows of white canines, brought your face in close, sniffing my dark hair, then tore off my braids with your teeth. Savage, you screamed, the color of my mother still dripping from your mouth. Savage, you screamed, bending me over the foot of the bed, forcing the Lord's Prayer past my lips, your pale, strange God looking down on my bowed head. I could taste the gunpowder on your fingers just looking at them, smelled the fire and iron blood in the air. You cracked your eyes open and locked onto me. Painted a target on my spirit with one stare. How can you live atop these mountains of broken bodies? Eat your dinner on a table crafted from the destroyed. Wipe your fingers on the bloody hem of my skirt. Crumbs shoot out of your mouth like the bullets you pushed into generations of bronze girls and boys. How can you feed us poison disguised as medicine? How can you bleach the color from our memories with fear? How can you watch an entire people burn and still pack heat? Erase this nation's history of native blood and tears. You infected us with your sicknesses, robbed us of our legends and forced assimilation, your white education, a rape of the mind, destruction after destruction, the taking of consciousness. And still, our reservations are under siege. You see it in the land's geography, the sacrificial zones, the sacrificial plains, sacrificial lungs and livers. Now we dance in acid rain. Pipelines pumping oil, soiling the shit-colored water. A thirst has been born that cannot be quenched. Casino lights flash. Sounds of bottles breaking as our old chieftain drinks himself to death. I was a tiny girl, age 8, when the pale faces took me from my reservation, stripped me off of my beaded moccasins, ripped from the lands of the Dakota Sioux. I was too young to question them. Before that. I was as free as the wind that blew my hair, and no less spirited than a bounding deer. Before that. We were like little sportive nymphs on that Dakota sea of rolling green. But then the missionaries came.
1884.
They took us Native children to a school where we would learn English, become civilized. I was too young at the time to know any better. I begged my mother to allow me to embark on this grand adventure. I'd never seen a train before. I was excited to ride on that iron horse. But my excitement soon disappeared when I got to the school in Indiana. The teachers spoke a strange language, wore strange clothes. I wasn't allowed to sing my family songs or talk about my tribe's traditions. And the worst came when they forced me to cut my hair. For us, the Dakota Sioux, short hair was a sign of mourning or cowardice. I was alone, scared, angry, far from my family and loved ones. And even years later, after I learned English, finished school, and became an accomplished writer, pianist, violinist, I never forget that feeling of fear and loneliness. I knew the pale faces didn't see me as equal. But I didn't understand why I should be less important just because I was not white. Wasn't I American too? Who gave the pale faces the right to decide the right way to live and speak and dress? My family was here first. We'd been dressing ourselves, talking, and getting along just fine before the white settlers came and started telling us how to speak, dress, live. My life's goal became to open the door of American opportunity to the red man and encourage him to find his rightful place in American life. I joined and founded several Native American rights groups, edited a Native American magazine that called for citizenship rights. I even moved to Washington, D.C., where I continue to fight for the fair treatment of Native American people. And through the women's rights movement, I started a Native American committee within it.
Now the time is at hand when the American Indian shall have his day in court through the help of the women of America.
But I wanted more than voting rights. I wanted to share and restore the beauty of Native American culture within the world. I wrote a book called Old Indian Legends, an anthology where I retold stories I'd heard as a child. I also wrote the Sundance Opera, the first opera by a Native American. It told the love story of Winona, the daughter of a Sioux. Sundance, one of the tribal rituals the American government had banned. In these writings, I have tried to transplant the Native American spirit of these tales, root and all, into the English language, since America, in the last few centuries, has acquired a second tongue. I dream of a time.
I dream of a time
when bronze children live without the fear of disease, of rape, of famine. I dream of a time.
I dream of a time
when our sacred names, Sitting Bull and Kills at Night, are celebrated in our history books. I dream of a time.
I dream of a time
where our reservations return to the land we sowed and cherished. I dream so I can speak to my ancestors, to tell them, despite it all, that I am still here.
Hell's That's what they call this place. This stretch of land you see behind me used to be the city's garbage dump. Me. I set my gaze upon Hell's Hole, and you know what I saw? I saw and heard the voice of God. I saw opportunity to invest in a human soul. A $5 down payment I made selling my homemade ice cream and sweet potato pies. That set me towards the $250 I needed to seal the deal, and she was mine. Hell's Hope, it became my inspiration to plunge into creating something from nothing. And that something turned out to be the college you see here behind me, that the Ku Klux Klan came to tear down one night. All because I had the audacity to educate my fellow Black people. I was turning them on to a desire to vote. One night in 1920, a threat was made against my college in Daytona Beach, Florida. This was a different kind of school. Here I taught girls crafts and homemaking, how to earn a living. They were trained with their heads, hand, and heart. Their heads to think, their hands to work, and their hearts to have faith in God. It was there and in the surrounding community that I motivated Blacks to vote. I guided them through the maze of tricks and regulations concocted to prevent them from voting. In particular, in 1920, I got out the vote for a white candidate, backing the first public high school for Black people, as well as better streets, lighting, and a sewer in our part of town. The night before the election, the tranquil black of night was shattered by the blaring horns announcing the arrival of the Ku Klux Klan. I went to a window and saw that the streetlights near the campus were out. In the shadow of the night, I could make out about 200 white robes marching towards the campus, led by a Klansman carrying a burning cross. They arrived on the campus, and the children started screaming, "Shh! Turn out all the lights in the building." Now that the building was dark, I ordered them to turn on the floodlights. Let them know that we're home. Engulfed in white light, the Klansmen stopped. Now they were the ones being watched. Me and my students started to sing. Be not dismayed, these Klansmen with their robes and hoods and masks, they realized they had intimidated no one, and we sang on towards the white robes of their backs as they retreated like the cowards they are into the night. The next day, Blacks were subjected to long lines as we waited to vote. We stood in line all day, and we got that chance to vote just before closing time. And it paid off. Our candidate won. Ooh, we won!
By the 1920s, Bethune was becoming a figure of national significance. In 1924,
I was elected president of the National Association for Colored Women, an organization that lobbied for anti-lynching laws, prison reform, and job training for women.
In 1927, her friends treated Bethune to the first vacation she had ever taken.
I'm now 52 and I sailed to Europe. In Monte Carlo, I saw the gambling casinos. And at the Vatican, Pope Pius XI granted me an audience.
In London, Lady Nancy Astor, the first woman to serve in the British Parliament, befriended her.
On the Isle of Skye in Scotland, she had tea with Lady Edith McLeod, whose family tree included the McLeods on whose South Carolina plantation Mary had lived as a child.
In Switzerland, she saw her first Black robe. She sent home 24 cuttings and told her friends that
a white rose does not want to be red. Every rose wants to be itself. Every person, every nation deserves the right to flourish as itself. The black rose became my trademark. My name is Mary McLeod Bethune. I was born in 1875 in Maysville, South Carolina. My parents were enslaved. My siblings were born into slavery. I worked with them in the field, starting at the tender age of 5. One day, while helping my mother as we delivered the white people's wash, allowed to go into the children's nursery, I picked up a book. It was snatched from my hands, and the white children babbled on about how I couldn't read. It was then I realized the only difference between black and white people was the ability to read and write, was opportunity. I got an education. I attended college, hoping to become a missionary in Africa. But God had a different plan for me. I was to change the minds and lives of the Lord's children here in America. My school for African American girls merged with the private institute for African American boys and became known as the Bethune-Cookman School. I was president of the college from 1923 to 1942 and 1946 to 1947. One of the few women to be a college president at that time in America. I wrote prolifically, publishing in the National Notes, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Afro-American Journal, and the Chicago Defender, among others. I was a member of the presidential campaign for Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932 and was invited to be a member of his black cabinet, advising him on all matters concerning African Americans. Upon my death, it was said,
she gave out faith and hope as if they were pills, and she some sort of doctor.
Now, my home in Daytona, Florida is a national landmark. My house in Washington, D.C. is a historic site. There's a statue of me in Lincoln Park in Washington, D.C. And in 2018, the Florida legislature designated me as one of 2 statues to be placed in the National Statuary Hall collection. My parents were owned. Now I was the owner of land, of property, of education, of respect, of my own life, of my own narrative.
I was born Zitkála-Šá.
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 Remember me.
My name is Mabel Ping-Hua Lee.
Mabel Ping-Hua Lee.
Remember me.
I am Hovita Idar.
Hovita Idar.
Jovita Idar.
Remember me.
I am Frances Ellen Watkins Harper.
Frances Ellen Watkins Harper.
Remember me.
My name is Mary McLeod Bethune.
Mary McLeod.
Bethune.
Remember me.
Hovita Idar.
Elizabeth Piper Ensley.
Dr. Maddie E. Coleman.
Susan B. Anthony.
Ida B. Wells Barnett.
Della Hunt.
Mary P. Burrell.
Coralie Franklin Cook.
Ida B. Wells Barnett.
Mary McLeod Bethune.
Dr. Maddie E. Coleman.
Lucy Stone.
Church.
Stone.
Amelia Blumo.
Dr. Anna Howard Shaw.
Dr. Maddie E. Coleman.
Mary Church Terrell.
Zitkála-Šá.
Suzette the Flesh Tibbles.
Elizabeth Piper Ensley.
Elizabeth Katie Stanton.
Anna Roque de Dupré.
Lucretia Mott.
Susan B. Anthony.
Frances Ellen Watkins Harper.
Mary Garrett Hay.
Blanche Ames Ames.
Dr. Mary Walker.
Lucy Stone.
Mabel Ping-Hua Lee.
Sojourner Truth.
Alice Paul.
Jeanette Rain.
Matilda Jocelyn Gage.
Sojourner Truth.
Coralie Franklin.
Rose Schneider.
Emmeline Pankhurst.
Lucretia Mott.
Alice Paul.
Zitkála-Šá.
We will not be overlooked.
We will continue to fight.
For justice and equality.
The fight is not finished.
We keep on marching.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meetha Agrawal. I'm the Arts and Leisure Editor at the New York Times. Welcome to our Finish the Fight live talkback. I'm joined by three of the project's creators, Ming Peiffer, the writer, Whitney White, the director, and Veronica Chambers, narrative project editor at the Times, and co-authors of the new book, Finish the Fight, The Brave and Revolutionary Women Who Fought for the Right to Vote, which Ming and Whitney adapted to create this digital play you all just witnessed. Ming, Whitney, Veronica, welcome. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. You can submit questions for the panel anytime using the hashtag NYT Finish the Fight on Twitter. We've already got lots of great questions that many of you sent in advance. We'll get to those in a little bit. And please note that this event is being recorded. Now let's get started. Whitney, Ming, Veronica, this is such a monumental achievement. Congratulations. What you did, writing a book, writing a play, directing a play in this digital moment would be impressive, but that you did all three, I'm guessing at more than 6 feet of distance, is truly remarkable. So much I want to know about. Veronica, you've been leading the team at the Times that has spent months exploring the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which won women the right to vote. You created a new book also called Finish the Fight about some of the women who fought for voting rights, but have been less recognized by history. Can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the project and how did you even begin to imagine turning this into a play?
Sure. So we had actually worked on the moon landing coverage last year, and there was an amazing play that was directed by Bartlett Sher. So when we were thinking about suffrage, we were thinking theater right from the beginning. And we had this moment where we dove into the history and the research, and we were sitting in a conference room at the New York Times office where we haven't been for a very long time. And we had a white wall with the names of 60 overlooked suffragists, Black women, white women, queer women, working class women, Latinx women, Asian American women. And we thought, wow, there's so many stories. And from there, it was just a choice of just winnowing. And we had a meeting with Whitney actually right before quarantine. And so we were planning to do this as a live event. Like this was supposed to be a one night only New York City event, and then it just grew from there.
Ming and Whitney, how did you go about adapting the book? What you see on the page is pretty different than what ended up on the stage. Can you tell us about that process? Ming, maybe you could get us started.
Well, Whitney brought me onto the project, and so we just kind of got on the phone and we started just talking about how we were going to do this. And the way that the book is structured, sort of the obvious, I think, way to go about it was to just kind of have monologues for each woman and sort of do it chapter by chapter. But then we both kind of were talking about it, and out of that came this idea. You know, Whitney talked about creating a liminal space, and I was like, let's just create a sort of, it's theater, so let's create an arena where we can actually have these women talking to one another, asking questions of one another, cheering one another on. And that just felt like a way to just, one, on a structural level, keep it more dynamic, but also just, I don't know, I think reflect what I would have liked to say to these women had I had the chance.
Whitney, what was your vision for the project?
Well, you know, when I read the book, I think Ming and I had a similar reaction. It just kind of it just kind of really moved me, because the reality is there's so many more women chronicled in Veronica's incredible book that we were able to show in the piece. And many of those women are just like us. They're diverse, they're smart, and they're looking at the world around them. And I didn't know who they were. So it was an educational experience for me as well. And so we were like, okay, well, we can't do all of these amazing women in the book. So let's fall really deeply into 5 of their stories. And Ming and I started talking about, things we're going through today. I feel like we're both very contemporary artists. So we wanted to make these women feel like they were in dialogue with the now. They're not relics. They're actually just like us. So I think that was always at the heart of how are we going to adapt this and how are we going to bring them to life. We didn't want to make something feel like a dusty museum piece. We wanted it to feel like it was rooted in the now. And so just embarked on a journey asking that question all of the time.
I think it very much feels like it's the now. How did you pick these 5 stories out of all the women who were featured in Finish the Fight?
It was so hard.
Yeah, it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah, no, Whitney, go.
We talked to Veronica. Well, I just remember that we had a phone call that was really informative. Do you remember that? It was our first time talking to Veronica together. And Ming already had an impulse about the women she was interested in. And I trust Ming. Ming is just one of the most exciting playwrights alive right now. And she was telling me about the women she was interested in. And then Veronica started telling us anecdotes about the women and stories about the women. And that was kind of the beginning of it. But I'll let you guys take it from there.
Yeah, I think in terms of whittling it down, it was so hard to choose, but really what was important was to show the diversity of this women, not just in a cultural sense or racial sense, but actually the diversity of thought and action, because these women had very similar goals and very similar wants for their lives, their cultures, and their fellow women, but they all went about it in very different ways. And so that was at the forefront of my mind when thinking about who we would select and focus on.
Veronica, were you surprised by who sparked for them? Were there people who you thought, I really wanted to see that person on stage, their story told?
No, I mean, we really fell in love with the women in the book. My co-authors, Jenny Schuessler, Amy Padnani, Jen Harlan, Vivian Wang, and it just became and Sandra Garcia. And I think that these women, Mabel Ping-Hua Lee was a favorite from the very beginning. I think that Frances Ellen Watkins Harper is just, I think for a lot of people, you just didn't know about that type of Black woman. And I love that not all the Black women are the same. I think that's something we talked about, that Mary McLeod Bethune has a really different experience than Frances. Jovita Idar was a favorite from really early on. I mean, we had already made some hard choices. So I think by the time we got into the play, we were really excited to have any of the women from the book featured.
So as Veronica said, initially this project was imagined as a live theatrical, one night only kind of event, and then everything happened. And you had to shift it into something. Now it's hard to imagine for me what the other thing could have been, but I'd love to know, what was that like? How did that process unfold? What were the different iterations you considered?
I think the one thing
No, you go ahead.
Well, the great thing that Whitney said right away is, I don't want it to be theater by Zoom. She didn't want the Brady Bunch and people reading by script. And so immediately that, I just think it's been an interesting process to try to keep the spirit of being in a theater together and that transformative, transported feeling without feeling like it's like a Zoom call with your grandma, So.
Yeah. And so as soon as we knew it was going to be digital, it was like, well, what other elements can we incorporate? Can we do animation? Can we do scoring? Can we have music? And Ming really brilliantly, immediately, she was like, okay, well, how can I also speak to the medium and rhythm at which we need to work in this new kind of format? And she just pivoted so amazingly. But it was really fast. And I have to say thank you to Veronica and Ming and to the New York Times and Rachel Karp and everybody behind it, because the kind of push we had to do behind the scenes to pivot everything pretty huge, and it took months, which is very different for a playwriting process. But it happened, and I think it's a testament to like everyone's will and desire to make art in this time, and that we have to keep making art in this time. But it was a really big pivot, actually.
Oh, I'm sure. Ming, how different was the final play from what you had been writing up to that point?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I this is my first time writing for this medium. And so I really had no sort of visual sense of how it was going to manifest because it wasn't quite TV film. It wasn't a play. So for me, I was just kind of, I'm going to focus on the dialogue. I'm going to focus on these women's stories, on the tone and vibe of it, but sort of leave it up to Whitney to really figure out how to do this. And I think she just did such a beautiful, incredible job in terms of making it visually dynamic, in terms of creating a space, creating a feel, creating a sense of time and collapsing of time. And so I'm just so incredibly pleased and in awe, honestly, of the work that Whitney did to bring this to life.
And the actors.
Yeah. And the actors. Had you cast
them? The actors. Yes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
the incredible
talk
actors.
about them?
Yes, absolutely. Had you cast them before you shifted, before you pivoted?
Say that one more time.
Casting afterwards.
Had you cast them before you pivoted, or were you kind of already in lockdown at that point?
No, what Ming said, it was like we had the good fortune to pivot immediately and then like jumpstart our process. So we could start writing in a way that fit the format, find women who were in dialogue with the piece, who have some experience on camera, but also experience with theater. And also actresses that are actors that are that live in their own political will. The actors are amazing. I have to take a second to be like, I love them so much. They were so great.
Yeah, we love you so much, and we're so lucky to have all of you.
They were great.
So appreciative of the performances. Just huge.
So I'm curious, theater is such a collaborative process. How did you all do this? Socially distanced or from your individual homes? What was that like? Have you worked in that way before?
No,
it was completely.
Yeah, no, I hadn't worked like that at all. I wasn't as involved in the rehearsal process as I wish I could have been, just because of like timing and things like that. But it was hard to totally know because we're filming separately, right? And then putting it all together. And so, yeah, sort of knowing how things were going to play out was interesting, but then everything once it came together all worked. But it was like, at least for me, I had some points in time where not knowing how is everything going to fit together.
It took a lot of trust, because we had people working in New York. Ming and I also were in different parts of the country because of where we were during the lockdown. Some of them were in California. So we had this huge push, and it took a lot of trust. It took a lot of online communication, which was hard. I'm used to communicating in person. So I think our first week of shooting, I was like, all right, this is what it is. And we kind of had to gear up for it. But once we found a rhythm, it was quite beautiful, and I'm really grateful for the trust that Ming bestowed on me with it, and Veronica as well, because there were times, because we couldn't all be looking at something at the same time, an editor had to look at it, then the sound person looks at it, then I look at it, then Ming looks at it. So it's kind of like playing telephone with a piece of art. So you end up making like what feels like a collage, and that's hard. That's a very different way to work, I think, for theater people, but we pulled it together, and it's kind of amazing.
I'm curious, of all the stories and moments from these women's lives, what's most stayed with each of you? Veronica?
I think that Harriett Foy's portrayal of Mary McLeod Bethune, I think partly because it comes at the end, but I love the Black Rose piece that Ming wrote. And I also just feel like she kind of comes in as a surprise because the other women have been interacting. And I think it's one of those things where you realize, oh, you write a book and theater becomes something so different that the women just live in a different way. But in in some way, I do feel like what they did was they captured what we were feeling when we were writing this book and the conversations we had among ourselves and the way that the women came alive for us as authors. They brought them to life on screen, and I love it. So.
I love them all so much. But I think for me, and this was actually Whitney's idea, was at the end to sort of open it up and really truly bring it into our modern current moment and have all these other women come in and just kind of end in this crescendo and this aria, if you will, of all these different women's voices. That for me just feels like that's the power which we do in fact have if we choose to harness it as such and work together and support one another. So that for me feels really resonant and really important.
It's amazing. For me, I love Ming's beginning. From the moment Mabel Ping-Hua Lee is like, hold on, can we talk about this? Because this play of Ming's I encountered was a play called Usual Girls that our good friend Tyne Raffaelli directed, and I loved it so much. It's such incredible piece of contemporary theater, and Ming did this thing at the beginning of the play where all the women are collapsed in the same time, talking with each other, and she found a way to have them speak in a contemporary way, yet still feel like they were of now and then. And I think that first unit is really a spectacular testament to Ming's ability, because you don't doubt for a minute that all these women are in a liminal space, in a kind of sisterhood, in a kind of community, and she just did it like that. And the beginnings of plays are always the hardest. So I kind of am amazed by the beginning of it.
I agree. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions from the audience, and they had a lot.
Okay.
Leah from Kansas wants to know, Veronica, I think this would be a good one for you. What sort of research did the writers have to do to find the stories of these women, stories that have been largely left out of the accepted narrative?
So the research was exhaustive. We are a tribe of 6 co-authors who are women, but we have to give a shout out to our research director, Nick Donofrio, because we had files upon files. We read so many books by people like Susan Ware and Martha Jones and Sally Roach Wagner. I mean, suffrage history encompasses almost 100 years. So we read books, we listened to radio episodes, we read a lot of articles, and it was great actually to go back into the presses of the Times itself and other papers. So, I mean, we had hundreds of pages of files and research on every single suffragist that we wrote about.
This is actually not a reader question; it's mine, or a viewer question. I'm curious. Some of the narrative was historical, and some of it was imagined. How did you figure out how do you walk that line? How did you decide, okay, this is where we're going to kind of tell a story that feels inspired by this person's life, but isn't directly drawn from the research?
I tried to, as much as possible, just isolate moments in the actual, in the reality and the history that felt like they could be dramatized. So while some of the dialogue that was happening, for example, with Hovita Idar, with the police coming to her newspaper, that was something that actually happened. Do we actually know what she said? Do we know what that back and forth was? No, but I tried to, as much as possible, just find real instances that I could then kind of imagine dialogue around. Other than that, it's really just the few times in which they interact that is imagined, but that's more kind of getting into their psyche as opposed to stating a real fact of a place or historical time in which something happened. So really, for the most part, it is rooted in reality. It's only some of the dialogue that is imagined.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Whitney, Emily from Missouri wanted to know, did you have difficulty trying to capture the personality and spirit of these women in a virtual space?
That's such a good question. Thank you for asking it. I think at first it was hard because the magic that comes from performance, even if you're making a film, is derived from a collective experience. There's other people on set with you, you're in real space and time, and you get to kind of channel each other and channel the language. And Ming put so much incredible personality into the text, but these actors were very brave because they were alone in their own homes and we were on this digital interface. And so they had to generate so much on their own. And it's a testament to their ability to and willingness to do the job, right? To show up and like make something happen. But at first it was a little hard because it's like, how do you get the spirit of these women on the screen? So it was kind of like a science experiment, and we tried lots of different ways.
We had lots of questions from people asking about how to turn this into curriculum, or if this could be kind of learned, how this might be learned in schools. What are your hopes for what this play, what its afterlife might be after tonight?
I think being taught in schools would be wonderful. I had a conversation with one of the producers, Rachel Karp, about this early on. But I think one of the things that inspired me the most was actually a conversation we had with Veronica, where she talked about wanting to trouble the word suffrage. And I think that entire idea in terms of questioning the history that we are being given, because I know that Whitney and I had very similar experiences. And when we read Veronica's book, it's like, why weren't we taught about these women? And so I would love to not only be able to introduce these women to young kids and young adults, but also to teach them how to interrogate what is being sold to us as history, because their history is being filtered through very certain mouthpieces and certain people. And so I think that inquisitive nature, actually interrogating what a word means, interrogating where a story is coming from, that's the type of thing that I would be really excited to build into a curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Ming said that perfectly. It's about representation. If you see yourself reflected in something, then you think you're a part of it. If you're given a narrative in which you're not a part of it and you don't see anyone like you in that history, and you're left out of it, why would you be motivated to stand up for yourself and others like you now? So I think it's like very imperative for young women, all kinds of young women, to get their hands on it.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that and just say, last night, Michelle Obama spoke at the Democratic Convention, and so many people were moved by it. And immediately, my callback was to Mary Church Terrell and her speaking at the International Women's Conference in Berlin in 1904, I think it is. I don't have it in front of me. It's either 1904 or 1909. I have so many dates in my head. But she was a Black woman, one of the first Black women to graduate from Oberlin. And she not only spoke at this conference in Berlin, but she gave her speech 3 times in English, French, and German. And this is a woman whose parents were enslaved. I mean, when you're not taught that history, you don't know how powerful your lineage and your heritage and your possibility can be. And so I'm hopeful that the book and the play really goes a long way to showing that everything we love now has a history.
I agree. Karen from New Mexico wanted to know, why do you think that the women that are featured in the book and the play, why have their names been eclipsed from the story of suffrage?
White supremacy.
I love Ming. I've seen people can say things that journalists can't. I guess I would also say that one of the things that I think we see with suffrage history is that people want to respect and idolize their heroes, but not have trouble holding how complicated these people were. And that's one of the things we talked about again and again in our coverage, saying that we can say that someone like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton deserve praise, while also saying they have a complicated history, Alice Paul as well, and a troubling experience with race and how they handled women of color. So I think handling complexity is very hard for people in history. And one of the things we tried to do was to hold complexity and through that widen the lens.
Ming and Veronica said it perfectly.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for your work. Thank you for answering all of our questions tonight. I'm excited to see where the play and where the book go next. But it seems like we got a pretty big audience tonight for it all. So that's all the time we have. Thank you, Ming, Whitney, and Veronica for joining us. Finish the Fight will continue to be available for free at nytimes.com and on the New York Times Events YouTube channel. So you can rewatch there and share with others. You can also find Finish the Fight and learn more about our other events at timesevents.nytimes.com. Thank you. Thank you all.
Buy the book. Buy the book. The book's amazing. Buy Veronica's book. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, Ming and Whitney, for going on this journey with us. It has been a privilege. And thank you to all the actors. The actors, you made history come alive, and we will be grateful to you forever for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good night.